Hello, friends. Hello, brothers. This is Justin with Masonic Improvement.
And Dennis Yates with Masonic Improvement.
And we have a very special guest this interview. It's going to be with Brother Brad Kohanke.
Hello, gentlemen.
Hello, Brad, and thank you for coming on today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Before he has to brag on himself, I have to brag on him first, because Brad is probably one of my best friends in Freemasonry and my
wow, I don't know how I feel about that, Dennis.
Yeah, I don't know if he wants me to come out like that, right? but he and one of my most esteemed mentors in Freemasonry, and I look up to him like no other. And so it's very exciting to have him on this program tonight and get to talk with him and dig into his mind and his book. So with that, I'll let you introduce yourself, Brad, and tell our folks a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, my name is Brad Kohanke. I am a past master twice of Davy Crockett Lodge number 1225 in San Antonio. I currently serve as the worshipful master for Merit Lodge number 727. It's a traditional observance lodge, also in San Antonio. And currently I am the personal representative for the Sovereign Grand Inspector General for the Valley of San Antonio and the Scottish Rite. And by way of my Masonic bio, I mean, those are the high points, I guess. So
those are certainly higher than anywhere I have been, that's for sure.
So immediately I recognize another topic I would like to discuss with you after we finish talking about what's upcoming, and that would be your traditional observance lodge experience. But before we get into that, Brad, tell us a little bit about your book.
It's called Light Reflections, Philosophical Thoughts and Observations of a Texas Freemason. And it is a compilation of essays that I had written over the course of maybe a decade for my lodge newsletter. And I rewrote them in chapter form to put in this book. And the idea behind it was to create something like, do you guys remember that series of books called Chicken Soup for the Soul?
Yes, sir.
Oh yeah.
So I was hoping that it would be like that for Masons. So it's anecdotes, it's personal stories, it's thoughts and observations that I had accrued over the years. And then in 2019, when I served as Grand Orator for the Grand Lodge of Texas, I wrote historical observance orations and then the Grand Oration for Grand Lodge. And those comprise the last 6 chapters of the book. So it's about 286 pages, but I think the longest chapter in there is the Grand Oration, which is the final chapter. So it's the rest of them are maybe 3 pages long. So the idea was to read a chapter every day or two and think about it, and hopefully it'll provoke some thought and maybe stimulate some actions. So
that's exactly what I was thinking as I was reading it. I get up in the morning and pick up a book every morning before I do anything. I make my coffee, grab a book, and sit there and read for a little bit. And so since the book came out, I decided that was going to be my first go-to. And really, though, I actually end up reading 2 books every morning, because yours are short stories that you can read and think about and work on applying to yourself throughout the day and the upcoming years or whatever. And you know, it's a very cool book. It is exactly that. It's just like Chicken Soup for the Soul. It really is. I like it.
Good. I appreciate that. I have always had this desire to be an author. So that's what drove me initially to write at all. I never thought that these essays would end up in a compilation, but I enjoy writing. I enjoy the process of writing, and I enjoy trying to stimulate some thought and maybe get people to think about things in a different manner. And that's why I wanted to write the articles for the newsletter. Chris Williams, which is a previous guest of yours, was the newsletter editor, and he wrote his John Deacon articles, which are fabulous. And although they're based on actual things that happened, sometimes I was even present at some of those things as they took place. He's a great storyteller, and he elaborates on them in order to make them funny, and builds humor into his story, and cleverly weaves in these moral lessons in his stories, but they're presented as fictional stories. And I wanted to provide something that would do the same thing, only in a nonfiction format, in a more concise manner, so that everybody that read the newsletter would have something that they would gravitate towards. Not everybody likes to read the kind of stuff that I write, and they prefer Chris's stuff, and then vice versa. So we were trying to provide content that might appeal to a broader audience between the two of us. So
I see.
that's how it got started. And then, once I had done it for 10 years and realized I had so many, the idea of compiling them into a single volume seemed more feasible. And, with Chris Galloway and Perfect Ashlar Publishing looking for Masonic books to publish, the timing was perfect. So.
Absolutely. This I'd like to introduce is one of the paragraphs from your book, and it's off the first section, Know Thyself, the first chapter. And the whole reason I want to include this is because it's something that Justin and I believe wholeheartedly, and really I know that was Justin's goal in starting the Masonic Improvement podcast, and certainly my desire to jump in with him, was is for the same reason. But it says self-improvement requires much more than occasionally attending a meeting. It requires time for thought, reflection, and action. We must take the time to think about how we present ourselves as individuals and as a group to the world. Reflect on what areas we can improve, and take action take action necessary to make those improvements. Regularly attending Blue Lodge can help us in each of those endeavors. Your Blue Lodge is both a microcosm of the universe and a macrocosm of each individual. Man, when I read that one phrase, I was in. I was all in, ready to read the rest of the book. That's all it took for me. Tell us your philosophy on Masonic improvement, on self-improvement in Masonic relation.
Self-improvement as it relates to the teachings of Freemasonry. I mean, that's a broad topic to jump into. I said in there that, and I don't know if it's in that chapter or a later chapter, but improving yourself is not a destination, right? It's a lifelong journey.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people join our fraternity thinking that there are secrets to the universe that are going to be suddenly revealed to them during the initiatory process. And a lot of those guys are very disappointed after the degrees are completed and the proficiencies are given, because there's not a lot of education going on at the Blue Lodge level. I know I was disappointed.
Mhm.
And so I set out to find that information, and I did a lot of research. I did a lot of reading. I hung out with more learned Masons who were interested in the same things I was. And I realized that the education wasn't lacking because it wasn't supposed to be there. It was lacking because nobody was stepping up to provide it. And so at my lodge, we started this thing called the Davy Crockett Light Brigade, which was we meet twice a month. So we have 24 stated meetings a year. And at every stated meeting, we promised ourselves that we would provide a 10 to 15 minute educational program that was either educational, historical, or entertaining. And that way, the meeting was more than just reading the minutes, paying the bills, and going home.
Mhm.
Somebody would actually get something out of the meeting. And we started off with 5 guys who were willing to write original educational programs. But that very quickly grew to encompass almost every active member of the lodge. I think at last count, we had over 50 guys who had given educational presentations over the last 10 years.
Wow, that is impressive.
So
That's awesome.
when we talk about self-improvement in a Masonic context, the only ways you're going to do that is through education, right? Now you can do it by merely being exposed to more learned brethren, by spending time with those guys at the dinner table prior to the lodge meeting. You can do it by getting together in philosophical roundtables after lodge or on off weeks or whatever. But the most effective method is to have some sort of educational program in the stated meeting itself. And it actually improves attendance at the meetings. I remember when I first joined, we would have 80 guys at a stated meeting. And then over the years, it deteriorated down to, we were maybe get 15. But when we started the education, attendance was back up into the 30s and 40s. So
You start providing value and people start showing back up.
yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there's plenty of stuff to do out there, other than getting together for a marginal meal, arguing about whether or not you're going to pay the electric bill, approving the minutes, and going home. There's got to be some perceived value, or people are not going to attend. So.
I think there's quite a bit of value in the quote that Dennis shared regarding meditation on the lessons as well. Myself as a former educator, and of course we've all been to school, right? The fact is you can't hear something once and expect it to stick. That would make teaching a whole lot easier if that was the case. You need it. When you design a unit, for example, when you're teaching students, you reiterate the same thing over a period of time to really drive home what's important to understand. And so if the only real Masonic experiences you have are through a series of subpar degrees, for example, and then every time you go to lodge after that, it's simply business minutes and going home, there's no improvement taking place. And in fact, the lessons that you may have begun to learn will quickly fall to the wayside as you're no longer being exposed to them or discussing them or reflecting in some way.
Yeah, I agree. And I like going to degrees because those lessons, those moral lessons, are reiterated every time you witness it. So it's not just for the candidate, and it's not just for the guys that want to perform, it's for all of us, to constantly be re-exposed to those lessons. I mean, the 24-inch gauge lesson in the entered apprentice Mason's degree, when we talk about a ruler or a yardstick or something, and we're talking about it, we immediately go back to that lesson. Did I spend time with my family today? Did I do something good for somebody today? Did I spend time in prayers to the Almighty today? Mm-hmm. Because that lesson has been reiterated so many times. But to the profane world, when they see a yardstick or a ruler, they're just looking at a measuring device, Yeah. So through just constant exposure to that lesson gets ingrained in us, and then we see those items out in the world, and it reminds us of those lessons. So yeah, constant repetition is very helpful. But another thing also is there are so many deeper lessons hidden in the wording of the ritual.
Absolutely.
That most people don't pick up on the first time they hear it or the 10th time they hear it. And that's why those educational programs or philosophical roundtables are important, because when you get together and you discuss it, some of the most profound lessons in life are those times that you come to the realization on your own. You're participating in a discussion and you have this aha moment, and it sticks with you forever. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of stuff that I really enjoy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the meat and potatoes of Freemasonry right there, is when you get together as brothers and you start really going deep into, and not all the opinions are going to be the same when you're talking. And so you're all bouncing ideas off each other, and then you're driving home and you say, oh, well, now it just clicked. And then of course you call one of the brothers and tell them, hey, I get it. I understand what you were saying.
Yeah, you and I have had those conversations.
We have on the way home from San Antonio. I've called you and Chris for the very same things. It's those are some of the best times in Freemasonry that I've had is those type of moments.
Yeah, that's what I live for in Masonry, are those moments.
Brad, I would like to ask you about your traditional observance lodge.
Okay.
Would you expand a little bit on, particularly for those listeners who haven't heard of traditional observance? What is it? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's a touchy subject because not everybody agrees with the idea that those should exist. Okay. It is a lodge that tries to incorporate traditional modes of entering and exiting the lodge room that harken back to European and especially British lodges in the 1700s. So there is a ritual for entering. We wear tuxedos and white gloves. We have music that plays during the entry into the lodge. We have burning tapers instead of flashing light bulbs for our lesser lights. And then there is a particular ritual and music for exiting the lodge room. But from opening gavel to closing gavel, everything that we do is Texas work. It is nothing in between the gavels is anything different than any other lodge does. So all of the traditional observance aspects are in the way that we dress and in the way that we enter and exit the lodge room. We do gather for a meal after the meeting is over and have an educational program, and then each member is allowed to offer an opinion over dinner on that program. But it's not a topic that needs to necessarily be tiled in order to be discussed. If it is, we close the doors and don't let the staff in until we're done.
So is this a lodge that, was it pre-existing and adopted traditional observance practices? Or was this?
Yeah, I think
something
so.
else?
I mean, we are, Merit was originally chartered up in the Dallas area. And in 2000, they were on the verge of losing their charter because the number of members had dwindled so badly. And there was a group of brethren here in San Antonio that decided that they wanted to have an educational lodge. So they talked to those guys up there and they asked them if they joined, could they move the lodge to San Antonio? And those guys agreed as long as they could remain endowed members. And so the lodge was reconstituted in San Antonio. And then over the course of a couple of years, it became more of a traditional observance lodge. It's not the only one in Texas. I think St. Albans Lodge in College Station is also a TO lodge. I have never been there, but I know some of the guys that are members.
I visited St. Albans. It was a great experience for me. And I've been told that it's not strictly, like, they don't consider themselves traditional observance. That's what I was told. I don't know if they fall technically under that definition or not, but it is a great lodge. It's a great experience.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. It's all right.
I was gonna say, in watching the Netflix shows about the Freemasons and all that, and they show the grand procession at the Grand Lodge of England, and even with their constituent lodges, you see them walking in grand procession, at least to the cameras. I'm watching and I'm thinking, are they doing that every time, or is that because the cameras are here? but at the same time, they know how to do it and they're doing it, and that's, I wonder to myself, why can't we have that kind of experience? And I guess that's what Merit Lodge does, and the other lodge. Very, very cool. Very cool.
So my next question is, why traditional observance? And by that I mean, what does this traditional observance, these set of practices, offer that is appealing to you and the other members?
Well, I can only speak for myself. And I can assume that the same holds true for those guys. There is value in the history of our fraternity, and there have been so many changes made over the course of centuries that I think we've lost some of the importance of being a distinguished group of gentlemen. I don't know if you guys have read the book by Andrew Hammer called Observing the Craft.
Mm-hmm.
He makes so many excellent points in that book.
Yes, he does.
And I think we had him as a guest speaker at our lodge one time. And I tend to agree with almost everything that he says. And I think it's a shame that we don't put more value on what it is that we do. Our dues payments are obviously too low. We devalue ourselves by seeking to increase membership and not quality of membership. Mm-hmm. So there's this desire among several of us to go back and re-examine where we kind of went off track. There's another group called the Masonic Restoration Society that is worth checking out as well. I believe Andrew's a member of that. Several of us are members of that. But getting together in jeans and a t-shirt and paying the bills and having pizza, reading the minutes and going home, that's not what this organization was supposed to be about. It was supposed to be about a group of distinguished gentlemen who would get together and exchange ideas on the most important topics of the day, and maybe even act as leaders in their own societies or cities or towns or whatever. And you don't see that much anymore, and it's a shame.
What's interesting about, well, you said a lot of things that are interesting. Frankly, I took several notes, but what was interesting about what you just said is we often lament that the leaders of our communities are no longer Masons. But if you look historically, just here in Texas, if there was a influential man that was early on in the foundation of Texas, or any of the counties, or any of the communities, they were Masons more often than not. And often you'd see the same name involved with the county and the state and a few cities. And we've come a long way from that.
Yeah. In particular, among all of the states, every president and vice president was a member of the fraternity. 80% of the Senate and Congress were members of the fraternity. And yet only 15% of the population were members of the fraternity. So we were the leaders politically of Texas. And I read not too long ago that the star on the Texas flag was not a copy of the Stars and Stripes star. It was the 5-pointed star of the Masonic fraternity, representing the 5 points of fellowship. And when one of our guys was asked about it while visiting New York City, he said, Texas is definitely a Masonic country, and pointed to the fact that the star was on the flag.
I love it. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
When you were talking about the about the loss of tradition and whatnot, going through my mind, I'm thinking of how we see things, and how well in our social worlds over the years, over the generations, we've become individualistic people. And and Freemasonry, of course, it's the freedom of thought and expression and whatnot, and our nation has become such a free nation. But within Masonry, we have the freedom of thought and expression, but it seems like those traditions are meant to hold you together as a group and remind you that you are one body, and you are going into this together, and you're going out of the world together, and those ideals are shared ideals between all of the body, and taking them out. So they share their own individual thoughts inside the lodge, and it becomes a whole ideal, a whole way of living, and then they take it out into the world, and they take it out together into the world. And I think that there's something to be said about that, and that I think that's something that that ties right into what you're talking about our founding fathers, and how they created this great institution we live in, this great state we live in, and we have a lot to owe to them, and we should definitely honor and pay tribute to the past, for sure.
Yeah. And it's no coincidence that the the greatest leaders of our times in this country and beyond have been members of the fraternity.
Mhm.
Yeah. World War II, World War I, the Revolution, not just the Revolution in America, not just the Revolution in Texas, but in South America and France and Mexico and Italy. All of those great revolutions that were aimed at taking power from a tyrant and giving it to the people were led by Freemasons. And it's because of the teachings of the fraternity and the beliefs and values that we extol and teach our members. It's no coincidence that we were the ones that were leading the charge of governments of the people, by the people, for the people.
Mhm. To piggyback off what both of you said, it's not the fraternity that would ever encourage someone to run for an office. The fraternity would never do that, but it's the lessons themselves. And I think as you grow as a man and as a leader, you're naturally going to seek out opportunities to serve others, and that may be public office or volunteering or in organizations or something like that. It's the same thing with charity, because a lot of lodges focus on charity, and they try to run themselves more like service organizations. And it's not, faith, hope, and charity. We got those three pillars, and it's not saying that we should run ourselves as charities, but rather as we grow as men and as we find ourselves able to do so, we should be more inclined towards charitable causes. We should be, particularly to our brothers. But these are things that aren't facilitated by the organization itself. They are the results of the lessons as we integrate them and grow.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, I don't remember where I heard this, but I was recently exposed to either another podcast or something that I read. But the idea of us being a charitable organization, we are a charitable organization, but we're not a charity. And to your point, the fact that we're charitable comes directly out of the lessons that we're taught on a regular basis. If we were just a charity, we wouldn't need all the ritual trappings of the opening and closing rituals, the degree conferrals, the initiatory practices that we have. The Red Cross doesn't do that. The American Cancer Society doesn't do that. So there's something more to us than just being a charity.
It's a lot of bells and whistles just to fry fish.
Yeah, exactly.
With that, I'm gonna steal one more quote from your book, and it's on your section of the Golden Rule, and I'm gonna make it real quick. My favorite one is I guess it's pronounced Taoism. Is that correct?
Taoism, yeah.
Taoism. Okay, thank you. I'm still Texan. I'm gonna. You're lucky I didn't say Taoism, but the saying for the Golden Rule, and you express it in all the different religions. You show it in all the different religions, and every one of them has the same thing. It says the same thing. But I love this one the most, and it says, "Regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain. Regard your neighbor's loss as your own loss." How can you be a human being and if you have that philosophy and not want to bring everyone else up to be as strong as you are, help everyone around you to, build up the society instead of suppressing and keeping it down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that chapter. That came out of a discussion that I had with one of the wives when we were teaching officer leadership training when I was on the education committee. And she was of the opinion that Masonry and Christianity might not be able to coexist, so to speak, because we allow men of all faiths to join. And I told her basically what I wrote in that chapter. There are two things that all the major religions agree upon. And that is that there is a God that loves us and that he wants us to love one another.
Mhm.
And that first thing is not what Freemasonry focuses on. That's the job of the temple, the church, the synagogue, the mosque, whatever. Masonry focuses on the second thing, what it actually looks like in everyday practice to love one another. And that's what we are all about.
Absolutely.
And so, since all those religions have that in common, I don't think, go against anybody's principles by trying to focus on the things that we share instead of the things that divide us.
Brad, tell us why you joined Freemasonry.
So, I have been on a spiritual quest probably since I was about 15 years old. I have been interested in and reading tons of material about the various religions of the world. I got to the point where I was convinced that if I went far enough back historically, I would find the original belief system that was common to everybody. So over the course of time, my dad was a Mason, my grandfather was a Mason, but they never talked about it. We didn't have family picnics. We didn't have family nights at the lodge. The lodge was for the guys. All I knew was that he was gone once a month for some kind of secret meeting, and he never talked about it. And so, I move around for a while. I get my career started. I moved to San Antonio. And I'm still pursuing this spiritual quest, trying to get a better understanding of where I fit into things in the universe and what my relationship with God is and what it is that I'm supposed to be doing here. And this was back before the internet and back before Amazon and all that stuff, right? Even before the big box bookstores like Barnes and Noble. So in order to find books about some of these obscure topics that I was interested in, I had to go to a specialized bookstore and look through a book of available titles for these topics. And I went to the bookstore, the Twig. It used to be on Broadway, now it's down in the Pearl. And I had made a list of like 5 books that I wanted to order, and they had to be special ordered. And I took the list up to the desk and I gave it to Les Adams, who was the manager of the bookstore. And one of the books was called Duncan's Ritual. And he looked at the list and he was typing in the order form, and he looked and saw Duncan's Ritual on there, and he goes, "Are you a Mason?" And I said, "No, sir." And he goes, "Well, good, because if you were a Mason, you wouldn't be allowed to have this book." And I was like, "Oh, really? Well, that makes me want it more."
All the more
He said,
enticing.
"Well, yeah, if you're interested in Masonry, we're having a meeting next Tuesday. Why don't you come visit our lodge?" So I did. It was Davy Crockett Lodge, and I went and visited, and I met some of the guys and got to know them. They got to know me, and I ended up petitioning the lodge, and I called my dad and I said, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know that I put in a petition to become a Mason." And his first words were, "Oh my God, I thought you'd never ask." Which, totally ticked me off, because if I'd have known I had to ask, I'd have probably done it a long time before that. And I'm sure that there's tons of guys out there that have had the same experience, but I did. I came to it of my own free will and accord through just a search for a better spiritual understanding of my place in the universe. And so that's
nice.
how I came in.
I love it.
So, and that's the perfect segue for the next question, which I would say would be, how did the reality of Freemasonry compare with your expectations? Now, I know you went into it a little bit, prior, but I think you could expand on that just a little bit more.
Yeah, I joined in 1991, so I've been a member for 30 years now. And I was disappointed. I mean, I enjoyed the initiatory experience. I particularly liked the fellowcraft degree. I don't know what about it appealed to me, but there's some things in that lecture that really spoke to me, still speak to me. And so, at that time, you couldn't go in the lodge as an entered apprentice or a fellowcraft to experience a meeting. You couldn't go in and be part of the group until you were a master mason.
I remember
So there
those
was
days.
this big buildup of what to expect when you got to finally come into a meeting. And when I finally became a master mason and was allowed to attend, and all we had was a reading of the minutes and a paying of the bills, I was crushed. I was really disappointed. But I stayed active for a good many years, hoping somehow that things would change and maybe I'd find somebody that would lead me in the right direction. I got good moral instruction from the degrees and watching the degrees and talking about the degrees and talking to the guys over dinner and stuff. But after about 5 years, I just started to lose interest. I didn't feel like I was getting much out of it.
Interesting.
And it wasn't until my dad passed away that I was compelled to come back. When he knew he was not long for this world, he sat me down and said, when I go, I want to be buried wearing my apron. I want to be buried wearing my 14th degree Scottish Rite ring. I want you to call the secretary of Clear Lake Lodge number 1417 and arrange for a Masonic funeral. Make sure the tombstone has a square and compass on it. He gave me all these instructions and stuff. And when he passed away and I called those guys, and I had known them when I was a little kid, but I hadn't talked to them for years. And they said, we'll be there. We will be there. And on the day of his funeral, 18 guys showed up. And it was the week of Thanksgiving.
Wow.
And I remember standing up there and giving the eulogy. And at one point, I started to lose it. I really did not know if I was going to be able to finish. I got pretty emotional. I looked over at one of the guys sitting in the audience with his apron on, and he was sitting there with his arms crossed watching me. And as soon as I made eye contact with him, he just went, like, you can do this, you can finish. And after it was over, we went to the grave and they performed the service, and I got to stand there with them and wearing my apron and my sprig of evergreen and everything. And when it was over, my wife commented, the Masonic service was more meaningful than the church service that was performed. I'm like, yeah, you're right. And right then and there, I knew I had to come back. And when I came back with a vengeance. I was like, I didn't get this when I first started. And if I can't get it, I'm going to try to give it. And so
There you go.
I really threw myself into it. And that's where we are today.
Well, Masonry thanks you for being a rebel. That's for sure.
Well, it's all because of Charles Harvey, the master at Clear Lake Lodge. He's unknowingly had so many different impacts on me. And if you read my book, you'll read the chapters about him and how many times our paths have crossed over the years, and not knowing it was even him having an impact on me time and time again is a heck of a guy.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I really related to the beginning of the story where you said that you had to wait for a long time before you could sit in Master's Lodge. It was like that. I came in on the tail end of that, but it was still like that for me up until like a year or two after I turned in my master's degree. and there was definitely some anticipation to sit in an actual lodge meeting. And my experience was just like you described. I went in there very excited, and it was just minutes, pay the bills, and go home. And I went for a while as well. I kept thinking maybe I just went to a bad meeting. Maybe something would come up eventually, and it never did. And I'm afraid that I know that other people have echoed very similar situations, but it's the first time that I've interviewed somebody that had a very similar story. Um, that's it's something we got to fix badly.
Yeah, and when we were talking earlier about the value in our history, I think that part of that is what intrigues me. We had a tremendous boom in membership after the First World War, and then probably 10 times that after the Second World War. And I love those guys. The ones that are left, I still spend as much time as I can with, because I get so much out of the conversations that I have with them. But there were so many of them that we kind of lost what it was that we were, and we became that social club.
I agree.
Where they had established a bond in battle, and they were looking to rekindle that, and they found an ability to do that in the Masonic Lodge. And unfortunately, the high level discussions on philosophical topics and stuff had degenerated over time to where it just became what we experienced when we joined. And I think if we go back to what we were prior to that point, the guys that are coming in won't experience that same problem. I mean, the fact that you guys are doing this is evidence that, we're getting back to that. And I love that.
I appreciate that. I think if you look historically, the generations you're talking about, they were joiners. And so they came back from World War I, World War II, and they didn't just join Freemasonry. They joined Rotary and Lions and Kiwanis and Elk Lodge. All these organizations are different than Freemasonry. But I think when you have so many people joining all these organizations at once, they're going to take on officer positions. And I think over time, the uniqueness of any of these organizations is going to go away in favor of running everything more similar. And so I think that's, like you're touching on, I think that's probably about the time that we started losing a lot of what makes us unique, aside from our degree work and our memory work, is that we just had so many. And I don't mean ill. I'm not speaking poorly of these guys, but they ran Freemasonry like Rotary or like the Lions Club. And that's why so many Masonic lodges today look like service organizations.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a great analogy. If you go back and you read some of the short talk bulletins from the early 1920s, and then compare that to what's coming out now, there's going to be a lot of similarities on the top types of topics that are being discussed, the depth at which they're understood, the willingness to tackle the difficult subjects. But in between then and now, there's a big gap where we didn't really want to delve into much in the deep end.
It would offend members, and then we wouldn't be able to keep all the temples open.
Yeah.
Because we had to build a lot of them when we got all that membership. We had to build a lot more of them.
Yeah.
Brad, what are the strengths and weaknesses of our fraternity?
Well, boy, that's another tough question. I mean, we've touched on a lot of the weaknesses. I think one of our biggest challenges is that we are trying to be all things to all people. And we don't want to portray ourselves as elitists. We don't want to come across as arrogant. But the reality of it is, the organization was meant to be a gathering of special gentlemen who, were willing to tackle the tough ideas of the day and offer solutions and debate the difficult subjects and provide guidance and direction for society. And the fact that so many of our lessons are based in a moral understanding of how to best live your life and how to best contribute to society makes us uniquely positioned to produce those leaders. So I think if we go back to that and start focusing more on that, maybe society won't be in such trouble anymore. Because who else is going to take up that banner? There was an article from Midnight Freemasons that I used to read to the classes at officer leadership training, where the guy was in California and he had gone to a Grand Lodge meeting, and the Grand Master had stood up to give his talk, and he said, "We're getting a lot of new guys joining, but we don't understand what they want or why they're joining or where they came from." And he was appalled because, here he is joining because he had been told that, the truths that he was seeking, the things that he wasn't getting from school or the media or the newspaper or textbooks, would be provided in the Masonic fraternity. And the fact that their Grand Master didn't know why those guys were joining really bothered him. They joined to be taught the truths, to the moral truths.
There's only one reason why people should be joining.
Yeah.
And and it shows that we've gone off track or lost sight of that.
And that's the weakness. But the strength is that it's still there. We are suffering through a streamlining event right now that maybe isn't such a bad thing.
It feels very transitory.
Yeah.
We're in a like a limbo right now where we're not quite where we want to be, and we're still dealing with old mindsets and old mentalities.
Yeah.
But it's also exciting at the same time because we're getting to see this happen. So I'm like you mentioned, with the podcast, this is such a cool and unique way to get the word out to folks and get people interested in these topics of discussion and whatnot. Well, this is happening. It may be the minority right now, but it's happening throughout all the lodges. I think. I don't think it's just a couple of lodges here and there that's doing this. I think you're seeing these younger guys coming in and not. And I got to say, there's a lot of older guys mentoring these younger guys too. And that is very impressive and exciting. But I'm excited to see how we merge with the culture of technology and build upon the traditions as well and end up. I'm pretty excited about it myself.
I am too. I don't know of a time when I've been more optimistic about the future of the fraternity.
Right.
I certainly didn't feel this way 30 years ago.
I didn't feel this way 10 years ago.
I was going to say the same thing.
And it's odd too, because our membership numbers have continued to decrease because of, unfortunately, the death of a generation of joiners. But the guys that are coming in are, like you said, Justin, are coming in for the right reasons. And so there are groups of guys getting together all over the country. in philosophical roundtables and discussions and Zoom classes and podcasts and after dinner meetings and talking about, the interesting philosophical aspects of Masonry and the moral teachings of the craft. And I didn't see that 30 years ago, and you didn't see that 10 years ago. So it is exciting, and I'm very optimistic about the future.
Rolling off of that question, so where do you see our fraternity in the next 10, 20, 30 years?
I think we're going to get down to a critical mass. I think a lot of the big temples and cathedrals that were built to house the 300 plus new members that were initiated into the Scottish Rite twice a year are probably going to be lost. And we may not have these big, beautiful edifices that we built when we had millions of members, but the quality of the membership, the quality of the experience, and our ability to actually maintain our smaller facilities, I think will improve. And so we're nearing the low point now, and then once we get there, we'll begin to rise again. I don't think we'll ever have as many members as we did after World War II, but I'm not sure we were ever meant to be honest with you.
No, I don't think we were.
I tend to agree.
Yeah. Well, I would like to, if everyone is open to it, there's a resolution I wanted to discuss this evening while we still had time. I'm particularly looking at resolution number 11, and I'll read it out loud for the listeners. Resolution 11, whereas taking lodges in that is in labor. Okay. Taking pictures in a lodge, I presume that's what it's supposed to say, that is in labor, is currently not permissible according to Grand Master's decision of 1963, number 2. And the question was asked if it is permissible to take pictures inside a lodge room when it is at labor. And the answer is pictures should never be taken in a room while it is in labor. And even when called off, extreme care should be taken in connection with taking pictures in a room. Whereas positive public exposure benefits our Masonic organization, and whereas the Grand Lodge website displays photographs that provide for a positive image of Masonry, and whereas photographs should be taken by knowledgeable brothers who will not display Masonry in a negative light nor expose Masonic secrets, and whereas some Masonic events that occur while a lodge is in labor should be documented through the use of photography, therefore be it resolved that Article 224 be amended as follows. So a new article, 224C, photographs taking in a lodge at labor. No photographs may be taken in a lodge at labor except for those taken by a member of the Grand Photography Committee or a knowledgeable person designated by the Grand Master, except that any Master Mason may photograph the presentation of the Holy Book of the candidate's faith and apron in the Master Mason's degree. So I was curious. As usual, I'll reserve my thoughts for last, but I was curious what your thoughts, both of your thoughts, were on this resolution.
You're first.
Hey, who wants to start?
You're the guest.
So I get to go first, huh? Without knowing your opinions on it. I have a feeling they're going to differ from mine. I have vacillated on this idea of allowing the public access into the lodge rooms. There's a lodge in our area that doesn't open their lodge room to anybody until they are brought to light. the first time they see it is during the initiatory experience. And there's some value in that. So the idea of publicizing pictures of the inside of lodge rooms, and I don't know if I'm being old-fashioned or historical, but I don't know that that does much for us other than take away some of the mystery, some of the intrigue. It also concerns me because there are things that happen in the fellowcraft degree and the master's degree that, if pictures are posted, might ruin the upcoming experience of the next initiates in those degrees. Things that they don't see until they go through that experience.
Yeah, they don't know it's coming. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know visually what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm afraid that if you allow pictures in a lodge at labor, some of those things, maybe inadvertently or not, will get out there and might ruin the experience for somebody. So, you know, we've never taken pictures during a lodge that's at labor, but we've taken pictures afterwards. You know, we just did a master's degree last night. 35 people standing with the new Master Mason up in the East. Posted on Facebook. So I don't know why we would want to take pictures during labor.
I was thinking about that as well, and I can see the lure, because everyone wants to post everything on Facebook, and I'm one of those guys. I post a lot. I do. I mean, I think that we don't post enough about our fraternity, and we don't market ourselves properly. You know, but on the same note, I don't think that's a marketable object. I don't think that's necessary to be posted on Facebook. Now, if it were to be worded to where a photo can be taken to be given to the member for their records, or for their personal photo album, or to, you know, to put in the Bible or whatever, sure, that, to me, but they can do that outside of the labor as well. I have to tend to agree on that, because of that. They can take a picture with all the brothers, you know, with them at the same time in their apron with the you know, and so I think that yeah, I gotta say, I tend to agree on this one. I have to take the conservative approach on it, because there's some things I just really don't think that people need to see when the lodge is in labor, and you never know if they're trying to get the angle of this one thing, but something else is back there and they didn't realize it until after they've already posted it, or
Yeah.
something else. You know, you just really never know. I mean, it's tough. You never know what's going to be on the floor, or what's going to be on the wall, or what's going to, you know, you just never know.
Brad, I think what's old school is coming back around again, because I agree as well with both of you. That with a little asterisk beside what I just said, because I think online, particularly social media, is probably moving forward the new face of our fraternity. That's where most people's eyes are, and so it makes sense to post things. But by that I mean, like you said, after a degree, everybody stand in the East and take a picture, or I often take a selfie and tag myself at the lodge whenever I go to the lodge. Something I think being visible on social media is very important, but I don't think I don't think all kinds of visibility is positive. So as to what you're both saying, I don't think there's any benefit to be gained from posting pictures in a lodge while it's open or anything like that. I just don't see the benefit of that when you can already do so much. You can post so many things as it is. I feel as though the article, to be frank, is it's not really necessary and the reason I say that, there is the part where they say you could take pictures of the Bible presentation, the apron presentation during an open lodge. I've taken pictures of Bible presentations and apron presentations, but not during open lodge. So as soon as lodge is over, you recreate the presentation. You take a picture of whoever handing it to the candidate, and there you go. It's no different from a photographic perspective. It still conveys everything that goes across, but you do it without doing it in open lodge. I also am not a fan of non-Masons being in a lodge, and there's a very specific part of the EA Catechism and lecture that conveys the importance of the first time you behold a Masonic lodge. Well, that's kind of lost if you've already been in there. And I think as well, they're in certain parts of the degree, without going in a lot of detail, I think when you know what the lodge looks like, it takes some of the mystery out of certain parts, because you're pretty aware what the structure looks like.
Yeah.
So and I'm not trying to beat down on any of these resolutions that we talk about in any of these interviews or anything, but I also want to be, I'm a very minimalist person. So I think if it's not necessary, or if there's some way around it, why contribute more to an already very thick book? Yeah.
Everybody knows what you're talking about.
Yeah. I tend to think that folks that are maybe or here's my thought. Maybe these folks that are wanting to do these things, that are wanting to make those kind of special moments visible or whatever, maybe it's because they're not experiencing all that Freemasonry has to offer. When I think of what I want to see on a Facebook page or or blasted on my website, is I want to see somebody giving a presentation with some nicely dressed individuals eating dinner and talking about discussion. That's what I want. I want those pictures up on Facebook, showing the real fun, the real special moments like that. When you don't have that, maybe that's why you tend to pull to the other items that we really shouldn't be.
Dennis, what you just described is knowing your target audience and advertising towards that. And
exactly,
it's funny, but it's true. If you want to attract these young men, that's what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Young men they're looking for a reason to throw on a tux or a nice suit. Show them that this is a reason. This is something worthwhile going to.
I mean, and have an intellectual discussion, with other like-minded individuals, or maybe a debate with somebody who differs on opinions, but whose opinion you respect. There was a time several years ago where we went through this phase where every Grand Master was requiring us to have an open house. And I really didn't like that. I didn't want to do that because, they had these cards and explanations of everything that was in the lodge room. So these guys that were prospective joiners, everything had already been explained to them as they were walked through the lodge room. They were shown the altar and explained its meanings, and they were shown the pillars and explained their meanings, and the officers' seats and everything. And so what's so special about being brought to light? And
why would you want to see
explanation officially in the ritual?
Why would you want to see a movie if someone's already told you all the spoilers?
Exactly.
exactly.
What killed it for me was the very first one that we did. I was so excited to be up there and show the different hats and stuff like that. Just cool stuff, just the regalia, because we have a lot of old regalia in Goliad. We have a lot of good talking points in Goliad that you don't have to go into the ritual. So we're fortunate with that. But we're up there and I'm excited to go through our history and this and that. And the first guy that walks through the door, the greeter says, well, there ain't no secrets in Freemasonry. You can find it all on the internet. And it's like, are you kidding me? Really?
Time just to wrap up and go home at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Brad, definitely appreciate you coming on again for this interview. This has been a fantastic discussion. Do you have any parting words or anything you'd like to share before we wrap this up?
I want to reiterate again how optimistic I am about the future of the fraternity, because things like this are happening all over the place. You guys are doing this podcast, which is fabulous. But there, in addition to that, there are philosophical roundtables taking place all over the state and all over the country, where these guys are getting together. They're having a nice meal. They're getting dressed up. They're having an educational program, or at least a topic of discussion. They're all participating in the discussion. They're getting out of Freemasonry what they joined for. And we hear a lot from the conspiracy theorists that there's this inner circle of Masonry. And when you try to tell them that there isn't, they say, well, you're just not high enough in the organization and you haven't been exposed to it. So you just don't know, because obviously they know more about my fraternity than I do because of the internet, right? But in reality, they're kind of right. There are inner circles in the organization, but they're not a hierarchy that you climb to. There's these small groups and gatherings that take place all over the country, where 10, 15, 20 guys will get together and have these deep philosophical conversations and talk about the moral lessons that are taught by the fraternity. Those are the inner circles. Those are the things that you're looking for. And the fact that so many of them are happening now, and 30 years ago I couldn't find one anywhere, is very encouraging to me. And so if you are participating in any form or fashion, listening to podcasts, reading the literature that's being put out now, or the literature that was put out 100 years ago, or listening to these podcasts or participating in these podcasts, you can consider yourself part of the inner circle, because this is what it's all about.
Very nice.
Yeah, I love it. And I can only imagine back in the 90s, but 10 years ago, I felt like I was on an island. Granted, I'm very rural where I'm at, very rural Texas, but it felt like an island. And everything now feels so much more tight knit, so much more close together. Things like this are much more common. They were non-existent even like 10 years ago, or at least I didn't know where to find them. So absolutely on point. Brad, thanks again. I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you taking time out of your evening to come and talk with me and Dennis. Fantastic interview. Dennis, do you have anything you want to add as well?
I think that all I would like to add is that if you haven't seen or purchased the book on Light Reflection on Amazon, Light Reflection, it's a very nice book. You see my $2 bill. Everybody that knows me knows that that's if it's a book, if I die, then it has a $2 bill in it. If it doesn't, it's got a regular bookmark. So Brad, you've got two bookmarks in here, two $2 bills in it. So my boys will be keeping this one. I wish that there was a hardcover so that I could, really nicen it up. But I'm sure
there
that'll
is a
come.
hardcover.
Well, then I'm getting one. My younger son will hate me for giving him the soft copy.
Yeah, the hardcover came out last month. So.
But I also would like to say that if anybody that's listening to the podcast or watching the YouTube channel um, feels like they're on that island, because we've all been there at one time or another. If you feel like you're on that island, reach out to Masonic Improvement, because we're going to get you in touch with the guys in your area that can help you to achieve the goals that you're looking for in Freemasonry. Because that's what we're here for, is to strengthen our fraternity as a whole together. So that's all I got.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Dennis. I'll put the Amazon link to the book in the video description, as well as for the podcast. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody. This has been a terrific interview, and I will see everyone in the next podcast. Thank y'all for listening.
Take
Thanks.
care.